Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Let's look at where we are as a nation. Canadians have put their lives on hold for 10 months. While battling the impacts of COVID-19, they've had to watch as our allies and trading partners leapt ahead of us with plans to roll out rapid testing and vaccines, important tools to help reopen their economies. Here in Canada, it's been a very different experience. Just this past week, Justin Trudeau and his senior ministers gave us a different timeline nearly every day for when Canadians might be able to get the vaccine. Which timeline are Canadians supposed to have confidence in? How will vaccines get distributed? And who will get them first? All of these reasonable questions remain unanswered. Les Canadiens ont besoin d'un plan. Et la seule réponse de ce gouvernement a été de leur donner 3 dates différentes pour les vaccins. On sait depuis des mois qu'on avait besoin d'un plan concret. Et pourtant, le gouvernement agit comme s'il venait d'apprendre l'existence d'une pandémie. Les États-Unis, la France, le Royaume-Uni, tous ces pays ont déjà développé un plan de vaccination et ils le rendent public. Pourquoi pas le Canada? Pourquoi sommes-nous en retard? Other countries have confirmed they could complete their rollouts by next summer. Why not Canada? Canadians have been patient, but they want their lives back. They want to get back to normal as quickly as possible. Today, Conservatives are putting forward concrete actions to help preserve our economy so that there is a normal to get back to. Our small and medium-sized businesses have been devastated by the lockdowns. They are the heartbeat of our communities. They provide good jobs and opportunities for Canadians, making up 70% of our private sector workforce. And too many of these small and medium-sized businesses are staring bankruptcy in the face. According to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, 1 out of every 4 small businesses are going to run out of cash within 3 months. In fact, the CFIB is reporting 46% are worried about the survival of their business. That is nearly half of all Canadian businesses that are worried they will not survive this crisis. In light of all this, the Liberals still refuse to pause the punitive audits on small and medium-sized businesses, even after we introduced and passed a motion demanding this wait until after the summer. And in January, the Liberals are raising CPP payroll taxes again. It's clear the Liberals have not been a friend to small business owners that are such an important part of our communities. When times were good a few years ago, they called them tax cheats and hindered entrepreneurs and small business owners with restrictive red tape. Nothing appears to have changed in the Liberals' anti-small business approach throughout the pandemic. They have been late and confused with every step of the way during COVID-19. Their programs have been complicated and in some cases ineffective, leaving too many people without the help they needed to keep their doors open and Canadian workers on the payroll. La vérité, c'est que le Parti libéral est le parti des grandes entreprises. Il ne pense pas aux PME qui souffrent pendant la pandémie de règles souvent arbitraires et injustes. La réponse à tous les libéraux, c'est mettez-vous sur la PCU et vos enfants vont payer la dette plus tard. Mais les petits entrepreneurs ne veulent pas la PCU. Ils veulent garder leur business ouverte. Et maintenant, le gouvernement augmente les taxes sur le salaire aux employés. Les Canadiens ont besoin d'un premier ministre qui veut faire survivre l'économie, pas la transformer. Until rapid testing and vaccines can be fully rolled out across the country, the federal government should be doing everything it can to remove needless barriers to job creation. The government should be decreasing taxes and regulation on business. There will be no recovery if businesses go under. Now is the time to make sure they don't go under. So today we are calling on the government to take concrete action to help businesses before the holidays. We are asking for the complete details of the highly affected sectors credit availability program to be presented by December 16th. This must include criteria for which businesses can apply, which sectors are eligible, when repayment will be required, and how much forgiveness will be offered. Heading into Christmas, Canadian business owners and workers need clarity from their government in order to plan for the future. We are also calling on the government to fix the large employer emergency financing facility by reducing restrictions and amending the interest rate schedule. And finally, we are calling on the Liberal government to postpone the increase of CPP payroll taxes set for January 1st, as well as the increase for the carbon tax and the alcohol escalator tax planned for early next year. Canadian businesses and workers need certainty from the government. With no detail around support programs and promises of tax increases, how can Canadians have confidence that the Liberal government will be there to save millions of jobs that our small businesses provide? Les PME ont besoin de stabilité et d'aide. Ce n'est pas le moment d'augmenter les taxes. Notre motion demande au gouvernement libéral de reculer. Nous voulons plutôt travailler avec le gouvernement pour ajuster les programmes d'aide et les rendre plus performantes. Les Canadiens méritent un meilleur plan pour Noël. This is going to be a very difficult Christmas for Canadians. So we want all parties, including the Liberals, to work with us to ensure our small businesses and Canadian workers can head into the holiday season with a little more hope, knowing that these important measures will help them save jobs in the new year. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
So we'll now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. Quick reminder, as usual, one question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions, commençons par les questions au téléphone. Un petit rappel, une question de suivi. Nous avons le temps pour 6 questions. Aujourd'hui, we have time for 6 questions today. Operator, do we have a question?
Thank you. Please press star 1 if you have a question. Veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 si vous avez une question. Notre première question est de Hélène Buzetti du Devoir. À vous la parole, please go ahead.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole. J'aimerais revenir à un vote qui a eu lieu la semaine dernière à la Chambre des communes. C'était une motion du Bloc demandant notamment qu'il y ait une hausse importante des transferts en santé de la part d'Ottawa. Votre parti a voté pour. Alors, j'aimerais vous entendre, vous qui êtes le gouvernement en attente, à combien vous augmenteriez les transferts en santé, vous, si vous étiez premier ministre?
Merci pour la question, Hélène. C'était une motion aussi de saluer les infirmières et les médecins aussi. Et j'apprécie les efforts de tous nos premières lignes pendant la pandémie. Et comme j'ai dit pendant ma réunion avec le Premier ministre Legault, un gouvernement conservateur va augmenter les transferts en santé dans une manière prévisible et sans condition. Et ça serait mon approche de respect pour les chambres des compétences. Mais le montant, on va voir, mais on va augmenter dans une manière claire.
Lorsque votre parti était au pouvoir sous M. Harper, c'est lui qui avait instauré justement cette augmentation prévisible du transfert en santé, mais qui était limitée à 3 %. Alors, est-ce que c'est quelque chose de similaire à quoi on doit s'attendre de votre part, qu'on va juste garder un chiffre de croissance qui va peut-être être un peu plus haut que 3 %?
On va avoir une approche similaire parce que c'est important d'avoir les transferts clairs et prévisibles parce que les provinces doivent planifier pour leurs hôpitaux, leur système. Et particulièrement en pleine pandémie, c'est important d'avoir une approche de collaboration et pas d'une approche de paternaliste. Et c'est pourquoi on a des questions sur les transferts pour les CHSLD. C'est important pour le gouvernement fédéral de transférer dans une manière sans condition, et ça serait mon approche comme chef et comme premier ministre.
Opératrice, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question is from Brian Lilly from Toronto Sun. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Mr. O'Toole, you've talked about the desire to see the government forego tax increases on CPP, the alcohol escalator tax, and so on. But I'm wondering if you could tell me whether you've had conversations with the government about your motion, whether you expect any support, and if you can put it in light of the news that it appears Michael Sabia is going to be appointed the new deputy at Finance. He's someone who, days after the pandemic lockdown began, called all of this an opportunity to reshape our future economy, quoted Rem Emanuel saying, "You never want to let a serious crisis go to waste," and said that the government needed to be investing to change and reshape the economy. So do you see those two things, your motion and the vision put forward by the handpicked successor at Finance, being able to coexist?
Well, thank you, Brian. The finance I hold, the person at Finance I hold responsible is Minister Freeland, and of course Minister Trudeau. Mr. Sabia has a respected career in business. He was a deputy minister a generation ago, so we will see what the Prime Minister and Minister Freeland's plans are. Clearly, they have no plan for the economy. These guardrail notions are quite ridiculous, to be honest. She feels that she'll spend without regard for deficits or overall debt as long as interest rates are low. That is a very risky strategy. Canadians know that we needed to have support programs throughout the pandemic, but they don't want to see the next decade doom our children to paying for debt. So we'll hold them to account. On the motion, Brian, certainly with half of small businesses holding on by a thread, the government can't be raising taxes across the board, payroll taxes, automatic escalators for alcohol. You're seeing the carbon tax. So the NDP government in British Columbia has paused the carbon tax. So I'm hopeful Mr. Trudeau will recognize we need an economy to survive COVID-19. Therefore, we can't be raising taxes in the middle of the pandemic.
The government has several times tried to imply that you and your party have not supported things like CERB and other emergency measures that have been brought about due to the pandemic. They'll probably use this motion in that same vein. But I'd like your thoughts on that, and that a lot of the spending that is being blamed on the pandemic is not actually pandemic related, or can even, people can't find where exactly the money's going, and the government won't say. Do you think that they're using the pandemic to increase spending in areas that they want rather than areas that Canadians need?
Thank you, Brian. You're right. We supported the programs meant to help Canadian workers and meant to help Canadian families. The CERB, the wage subsidy. In fact, Conservatives improved the programs, from 10% to 75% for the wage subsidy, some of the business loans, the CEBA account, and the rent assistance programs. Mr. Trudeau prorogued Parliament, but eventually fixed the programs based on what we'd been advocating for since May. So we're here to fight for Canadian families and Canadian workers, and we'll continue to do so. We don't think it's time for a series of pet projects and experiments with our economy when we have a high level of unemployment, and it's second highest in the G7. Many employers may not hire Canadians back after the second wave because taxes are going up, including payroll taxes. So this is why the motion today is so critical. We need an economy to return to after the second wave, and increasing the tax burden on small businesses that are facing bankruptcy, and sending a signal that Ottawa only appreciates some jobs and doesn't appreciate jobs in the resource or manufacturing sectors. That's been Mr. Trudeau's legacy. We're going to fight for jobs for all Canadian families, and this motion today is an example of that.
Operator, next question on the phone.
Thank you. Notre prochaine question est de Mélanie Marquis de La Presse. À vous la parole, please go ahead.
Merci. Bonjour, M. O'Toole. Aujourd'hui, il y a la mise aux voix de votre motion où vous réclamez du gouvernement qui vous présente un plan sur les vaccins. En même temps, votre député Derek Sloan a toujours sa pétition en ligne qui a été signée par maintenant 29 000 personnes à peu près, où pas M. Sloan, mais où la pétition parle d'une campagne d'expérimentation humaine. Et parle des dangers potentiels d'un vaccin. Voyez-vous une contradiction entre votre démarche puisque M. Sloan parraine comme une pétition à la Chambre des communes?
Je ne suis pas en accord avec la pétition. Et comme vous le savez, on a posé des questions sur les vaccins il y a 2 mois dans la Chambre des communes. Aujourd'hui, on va voter sur notre motion pour un plan pour les vaccins. Les vaccins sont très importants en pleine pandémie. Et c'est pourquoi on a besoin d'un plan. Et c'est important d'éduquer les Canadiens sur les vaccins et notre système et la santé et la science sur les vaccins. Et c'est pourquoi c'est une opportunité pour le gouvernement, pour M. Trudeau, de démontrer la confiance dans notre système. Et c'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, on va voter et on va demander un plan avant 16 décembre. This is why we're asking for a plan, so that Canadians can be educated on the science and the planning behind the vaccines. The vaccines are critical. In the last 2 months, we've been asking repeatedly for a plan to roll out vaccines faster, to show Canadians that we have the capacity. It's a critically important tool. I don't agree with the petition that was introduced. Petitions are always coming into Parliament. But the reason many Canadians have questions is because the government is so secretive. They don't have a plan. They're not even willing to talk about how many freezers they've ordered. So we have some reasonable questions, and today we will vote for a plan that we'd like to see before December 16th, because without vaccines, without rapid tests, we're not going to have economy to save. And our motion today is also going to help small businesses who are hanging on by a thread.
Pouvez-vous préciser, M. O'Toole, ce qui vous dérange dans la pétition, pourquoi vous n'êtes pas d'accord et par ailleurs, si vous en avez discuté avec M. Sloan?
C'est important d'avoir un plan pour les vaccins. Il y a beaucoup de questions par les Canadiens en pleine pandémie sur les vaccins, sur l'efficacité des vaccins. Et c'est pourquoi c'est le temps pour le gouvernement de démontrer la confiance dans notre système. Et c'est plus important d'avoir un plan que les questions sur une pétition par les citoyens. Et c'est pourquoi, encore, on va demander un plan avant le 16 décembre, avant Noël. C'est important pour le bien-être, pour la santé mentale, pour notre population, d'avoir un plan immédiatement.
Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions de la salle. We'll now take question from the room. Mackenzie.
Mr. O'Toole, Mackenzie Gray with CTV. Your predecessor, Andrew Scheer, was asked a number of times if he trusted the advice of Dr. Tam, and he never gave us a straight answer. So I'd like to get your opinion. Do you trust the advice that Dr. Tam gives Canadians?
Yes, I do, Mackenzie. And in fact, every briefing, every chance I've had to be briefed by Dr. Tam, I've thanked her and the Health Canada team for their work throughout a pandemic. All Canadians have been working incredibly hard, and people in public health offices and our frontline healthcare workers have been working extraordinarily hard. The bad decisions on partnering with China, for example, the CanSino project, we lost 5 months of time. That was not a decision by a civil servant. That was a decision made by Mr. Trudeau and his cabinet. The fact that we didn't push for rapid diagnostic approvals using our CETA trade agreement as a template, for example, that was a political decision. So the slow and confused response, the fact that they won't publish a plan for our vaccination schedule in the new year, that is Mr. Trudeau. And so I appreciate the work done by public health officers and our civil service throughout this pandemic. The poor decisions and the slow response is the politicians, and I will hold them to account.
In the petition that Mr. Sloan brought forward, there was one passage that stuck out to me. I want to get your opinion if you agree with this. It says that bypassing proper safety protocols mean that COVID-19 vaccination is effectively human experimentation. Do you think in any way that a vaccine is human experimentation?
Well, vaccines have a clinical process, Mackenzie, for approval. And I was just speaking with a Canadian company last week, entering in the next month into phase 3 clinical approvals. This is why we need a plan. These approval processes could demonstrate confidence in Canadians' approach to vaccines. There is some vaccine hesitancy out in the public at large. That's why we need to show, here is the plan, here is the testing, here's the clinical data, here's its safe and effective use, here's how we're going to keep it at -70, and here's the likely time frame you will receive it. We should be telling Canadians that. Why the government's being so secretive, it's actually adding to a lack of confidence in the process.
Lee?
Yes, sir. Lee Berthium, Canadian Press. Good to see you. Just to kind of follow up on that, there is a constituency of people in this country who do not trust the science behind the vaccine. Pollsters have identified many of these people as likely to vote for your party. Again, do you have faith in Health Canada's protocols? If not, why not? And what is your message for those people who do not have that faith?
Well, thank you for the question, Lee. I have very great confidence in our process. And in fact, in the private sector, I did some work on healthcare regulation as a lawyer. And I'm happy to talk to Canadians on the importance of a vaccine, why it's important to get vaccinated, how our clinical peer-reviewed process for testing can give them certainty in the process. And let me correct you. In fact, the vaccine hesitancy is quite similar between the three parties. In fact, if you look at the CBC, Mr. Grenier's poll last week, there's not that much discrepancy between, say, the NDP supporters and Conservative supporters. This is why a plan is so critical, Lee. We need to tell people what tests there have been done, how the clinical trials went, how they can be applied safely, how it can be stored safely. Information in a pandemic is a critical tool, and the secrecy of the Trudeau government is leading to more uncertainty, more confusion, a lack of confidence at a time where we're seeing Christmas celebrations canceled. We need a plan. I hope the government vote for our motion today.
And do you intend to get the vaccine as soon as you are eligible?
Thanks, Lee. I've said many times that I intend to get the vaccine and my family as well in the priority indicated by a national plan. And I got the flu vaccination. Our family did this fall. That was important. My family has also been through the isolation and uncertainty with respect to COVID. So let me be perfectly clear. The vaccine is critical. It's a critical tool. I trust our health care system to make sure it's effective and safe for use. This is why Mr. Trudeau needs to show Canadians we have a plan. Here's the plan in terms of how we're going to use the vaccine, when you're likely going to get it, how we're going to store it to make sure it's effective for use, and the clinical work that's gone behind the safe and effective deployment of the vaccine. Information is critical in the pandemic, and that's why the secretive closed-door approach of the Trudeau government is causing more questions than providing certainty.
Our last question Our last question will be on the phone. La dernière question sera au téléphone. Operator, do we have a last question?
We do have a question from Bill Curry from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Thanks, Mr. O'Toole. I just want to get your thoughts on the sequence of events we've had on the finance file. We had the update, then the next day, Paul Rochon, the deputy minister, announced he's resigning, and now we're expected to get news today that Michael Sabia will take his place. So what do you make of that, and also what do you think this means for the Canada Infrastructure Bank, given that he was named chair just 8 months ago?
Well, thank you, Bill. As I said in a previous question, I'm going to hold Mr. Trudeau and Ms. Freeland to account for their lack of a plan for the economy, for really no plan to ever get our expenses under control over the next 5 years, and no detail on critical programs for small and large employers. This is what we're debating today in Parliament, our motion to provide certainty for some of the relief programs and to reduce taxes. Mr. Sabia was a civil servant here in Ottawa, a deputy minister when I was in high school. So it's interesting to see him back. You've seen our regular critique of the Infrastructure Bank that provided friends and salaries for Liberal insiders and delivered no projects. So that's the type of failure that is becoming all too common with the Trudeau government. You're going to see a totally different approach with a Conservative government. We will expect value for taxpayer money, and we will ensure that we're not the back of the line on vaccines or programs. We're going to put a priority on the economy.
And just as a follow-up, presumably since he's been talking about this in op-eds, he's being brought in to work on this stimulus phase that Ms. Freeland had outlined up to $100 billion. In your view, is there any need for stimulus, or do you think that once there's vaccines in place, the economy will take off on its own, or is it going to need government help of that size?
Well, some of the programs in the highly affected sectors and the large employer financing programs, we're talking about this motion today, Bill. There's been no uptake because they're too complicated, and there's actually barriers with respect to saving jobs. We've seen this with all of the government's programs, too cumbersome, too Ottawa bureaucratic, and nobody saving jobs as a result. So we're bringing the motion today. This is about preserving our economy. And if anything, Bill, in the future, we need to stop the ideological approach that Mr. Trudeau has to the economy. He thinks we should move past manufacturing. He told that to Ontario. He's against the resource economy. He hasn't negotiated a softwood lumber agreement, even with the Obama administration, and Mr. Biden was the vice president at the time. We've had bad trade deals, tariffs. We need every cylinder in our economic engine firing as we come out of COVID. So that's why you're going to see the Conservatives support all of these sectors through unwinding Bill C-69, for example, showing confidence so that we can see private sector investment again. Private sector investment has been running from Canada in the last few years. We want to make sure that we can attract it back because there are jobs behind every dollar.
And this is all the time we have. This concludes the press conference. C'est tout le temps qu'on avait. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Have a great day.